Yay, we're on the internet. We made it, which is a real
Yay.
feat some days when Mercury is retrograde. So,
Yes.
welcome everybody to today's Eat and Greet. And hopefully, in this next hour or so, we give you something that is worth your time to show up. So, I appreciate absolutely everybody being here. And this is fun because Shakira and I have like bunked into each other at different things this year. And that's kind of how this came together, as opposed to everybody else that I just stalked. We like actually keep getting just thrown together, which is so beautiful, right? Because it's almost like
Yeah.
friends you didn't know that you needed, or friends you didn't know that you had, kind of out there in the world. So Shakira Tabourn is joining us today, and we are going to talk about the condition of the ascendant, which is everybody can have that conversation no matter what chart you're using, no matter where you are in your studies. So Shakira, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Long
Oh no.
time no talk, right?
I know we just did something together last night too. So it's been a neat year for that, just kind of being thrown together over and over again with people and seeing who's in our community. I mean, I don't know, that's been my experience. What about you?
Totally. Yeah. I've been meeting so many new astrologers. It's been really great.
Yeah. So what's your favorite part been of 2020 so far?
I mean, I think personally, it's been just being a full-time astrologer. I went full-time like March 1st, which just happened to coincide with the pandemic. But just being able to like do my own thing, and that's just been incredible for me. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And how long did it take you to get to that full-time astrologer position?
Yeah, well, I've been practicing for about 5 years. And I was working in advertising and just like in the photo industry. I majored in photography in college. And yeah, it took quite some time, I guess, like five years to get to the point where I felt like I could take that leap. But I had been working, like I had been doing readings, like writing full time on top of working full time, like all of 2019. So it was like a lot of work to kind of be able to do that come 2020.
Absolutely. And so, can you just tell us really quickly, how did you start? How did you get into astrology?
Yeah, I'm I'm one of those people who kind of like have always been into astrology ever since I was a kid. I was mostly just really obsessed with birthdays when I was little. And so I just like was one of those people that remembered everyone's birthdays. My dad has always been into astronomy, so he had me memorizing like the planets and their distance from the sun when I was like 8 or 9. But it wasn't until I was around like 11 or 12, Jupiter return, when I first started like researching astrology and like looking it up online, seeing what boys I was compatible with.
You
And
have to
then,
know these things, you
yeah,
have to
it's
look it
so
up.
important. um, and then fast forward, when I was 21, I saw my chart for the first time and it just blew my mind. And I literally didn't sleep that night. I just started researching and never stopped.
That is freaking fabulous. And so, teacher wise, where did you study? How did you study? Because this is a big deal. I know that a lot of people in this community have been under some serious self study. And I have met the fear of, I didn't study with this person. So maybe my
Hmm.
practice isn't good enough. And I'm like, no, no, no. You don't know how many of us
No.
self studied for so long.
Yeah, I'm definitely a self-studier. I started with like a lot of Stephen Arroyo books. I just really love the way he writes and he talks a lot about the elements. And yeah, Stephen Arroyo was kind of where I got my jump start, but I also kind of dove into the early podcasts too. So, and or at least weekly weather and then the astrology podcasts amongst others, but those are the ones that like I've caught up or kept up with over the years. So yeah, the astrology podcast has been huge for me in terms of my education, and from there learned through like Austin Coppock and some of his like online classes, Kelly Surtees. Yeah, and then I would say like my major teachers, even though I haven't like studied directly with anyone, would probably be a mix of Chris Brennan, Austin Coppock, Kelly Surtees, Demetra George. Yeah, that's like what comes off the top of my head, but there's plenty of others too.
Yeah. And then this year we have just a whole mixed bag of new people out too who are studying some stuff that I'm like, oh my God, I never even thought to study that. And they're bringing it to light. So I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm just like, there's a lot of astro nourishment out there.
Yes, yeah, especially this year. It's been really enriching for sure.
Nothing like a pandemic to get the astrologers doing astrology, right?
Seriously, yeah. I was not expecting this to be the case, but here we are.
But here we are. And so we're going to talk today about the ascendant energy. And so, what's your ascendant? Do you
I'm a
share your
Pisces. Yeah, I'm
chart?
Pisces rising.
Which is so funny because the first whatever we did, I was like, that girl's got to be a Pisces rising. It's got to be a Pisces rising. She's just as chill as a pill over there. Like, there's got to be some Pisces going on over there. So that's absolutely brilliant. So all the Pisces rising people, you can nerd out with Shakira over that. I'm a Virgo rising, so
Yeah, our charts are like mirrored to each other.
yeah, I think so because you're a Scorpio too, aren't you?
Scorpio, yeah, and then Aries moon. I think you have a Libra moon, right?
Yes, we're opposite in everything. So this is
And where's your Venus?
it's in Aries.
So I have Venus in Libra.
See, and I have Mars in Libra opposing my Venus in Aries. So
Okay.
thank God for mutual reception. That
Yeah.
that has helped me a lot.
Yeah.
I got to marry far fewer people because of that, I think.
That's good.
Which is really a benefit. Okay, so if you are new and you're just getting in here, you're just starting to study, when we pull and we look at a chart, if you look immediately and directly to the left of that chart, you're going to see a sign that sits on what we call the ascending energy, that ascending line. So that is your ascendant. And sometimes you'll hear it called the rising sign, and that's about it. You'll see it ASC. Some people still use AC. I don't see that a lot. I see ASC most of the time. But the significance of this placement, different astrologers I have learned will really teach the weight of the significance of this placement differently. But what we all seem to generally kind of agree on is that when we're looking at your ascending energy, this is kind of your gatekeeper. This is who the world usually gets to meet first, especially provided you're not having an emotional breakdown, right? They get to meet this energy first and kind of get that engagement. So when people meet me, they'll usually meet that Virgo rising gatekeeper first, who's like, here's how we're going to get some things done. This is the terms of engagement. And they usually meet that before they get to meet my sun and my moon and the rest of my chart. So the ascending energy to some people, this is the lifeblood of the chart. It has heavy significance. You're growing into this because everything is funneled through it. And other people just treat it as another placement in the chart and focus on something else. So, Shakira, you're going to talk to us about this today. So, what is it for you? Where does this fit into your practice?
Yeah, I treat the ascendant as pretty important in that it to me describes the vibe. I call it your vibe, which is such a Pisces rising thing, I guess. But that's really what I like to call it in the sense that it's it's the energy that you began your life on, and it's sort of like that's the patterning that you continue to live your life on. Yeah, it's that external energy. It has a lot to do with your body, your physical body and form. It has a lot to do with what you look like, your appearance, how you adorn yourself, like the type of energy that you're just like giving off to the world, unconsciously, in my opinion. It's like it's your vibe. It's your, it's just what it's your vibe. And yeah, that ascendant degree being so important because it represents the Eastern horizon. And the Eastern horizon is where heaven meets earth. It's where spirit meets matter. And at that moment of your birth, that's when like you are completely separate. You're now a separate person from your mother. Like you're no longer a part of her. And you kind of become, that's when like your spirit is fully manifested into your physical form.
Hmm. Yeah. And do you, in terms of degree, do you bring in the decans with it when you are considering the condition of the ascendant energy, or is that not a thing for you?
Um, I don't I feel like I will, but not, I don't necessarily like in client consults bring that in. It's something to consider for sure. I think when I mostly place a lot more attention on the ruling planet. So the planet that rules over that sign. And I'm really interested in like the condition of that planet, where it's placed in the chart, what aspects it's making, like what house it's in, all of that.
Yeah, brilliant. And so, can you tell us a little bit more about, especially for our people that are new, why do you consider the ruling planet? Who cares about that? Why?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
So the planet that rules the first house or the ascendant is basically like the captain of the ship of life. That's the planet that I like to call it. It's like your avatar. It represents you the most out of all the planets, and will also speak to things like your body, your body's vitality, and just kind of like the direction that your life heads in, where you're where you tend to be more like where your focus tends to be in life. Yeah, it says a lot about who you are. I feel like even maybe not even more than the sun or the moon, but it adds such a rich dimension to the sun and the moon signs.
That is absolutely brilliant. So, in terms of thinking about how you would use this, is that we would say, okay, if your ascending is a Pisces, then we're going to watch out for Neptune, and I watch out for both Neptune and Jupiter. How do you use that? Do you stick traditional, or how do you use that?
Yeah, I only use the traditional rulerships, but yeah, I would look to Jupiter for Pisces.
Sure. And then we're going to look to see what Jupiter is doing in the rest of the chart. How is he interacting? Is anything interacting with that ascending energy? Is that correct? How you do that?
Yeah, exactly. Where it's at, the condition it's in. So, like, is it in the sign of its domicile? Is it at home? Is it exalted? Is it in detriment? Is it in fall? Is it conjunct Pluto? You know what I mean? Like adding, um, trying to figure out its how it functions, and then also looking at the house that it's into, because that's the area of life where there will be a lot of focus.
So we have a question down here, and I know this is kind of hard to answer. So we'll see what we can get you for an answer. Okay. So somebody said, "What does it mean if you're? What does Virgo rising mean, especially if you're a Gemini sun?"
Mm. Yeah, so I would ask like where their Mercury is for more information. But in general, to be a Virgo rising means that that energy that you give off to the world, the way that you live your life is going to be, it's going to have a Virgo vibe. So a Virgo vibe, well, it is ruled by Mercury. And Mercury rules both Virgo and Gemini, but it acts differently in both signs. So um, Mercury as the ruler of Virgo, Virgo tends to be like, well, how do I like to say talk about both Virgo and Gemini. So Gemini is an air sign and it collects information. Like Gemini just wants to know. It just wants to know all the things. So taking in that information, and then drawing connections between that data, that information. Whereas Virgo is also interested in that information, but it wants to filter it, it wants to refine it, and wants to categorize it, organize it, and basically make use of it. Virgo really wants to be useful. And there's the service aspect to that as well. So I think if you're a Gemini sun, it's likely your sun is in the 10th house, at least in whole sign houses, and your rising sign. I wouldn't know where your Mercury is to kind of see where yeah, kind of where that energy is playing out. Because that'll speak a lot to both like your career, your career ambitions, and how you're seen in a more public sphere, as well as how you identify with yourself, which would be the first house Virgo stuff.
First house Virgo. I'm a super duper fan because obviously I'm a Virgo rising, so I get that life, which is so funny. I always laugh when I talk to people and I tell them, I'm like, I can go to that lower vibe of Virgo real fast and get into like analysis paralysis. So I always laugh.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it's a miracle that I put out content ever because it is like never perfect. So thank God for some evolution through that chart and growing into what is not innately comfortable for me to do. Like I have to work a lot with that ascending energy to
Mm-hmm.
come out and play.
I totally relate to that because my ruling planet, Jupiter, the planet that rules my ascendant, is in Virgo. So I also deal with a lot of Virgo issues like analysis paralysis and not wanting to put out anything unless it's like absolutely perfect. But of course, that's unattainable. So I totally relate to that.
Right? I know. And then my Virgo's rising is like, I mean, but is it?
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, but is it? I'm like, yes, it is. So, do you want to look at a couple charts with me from the chat
Sure.
box and we'll
Yeah.
see the condition of these ascending energies? So, let's see what we got here. Hopefully, you guys can see that. And I don't know whose chart is who, you guys. I just grabbed names. So, look for the date or grab dates. So, just look for the date. Okay. Can you see that,
Cool.
Shakira?
Yes, I
Okay.
do.
All right. Beautiful.
Yeah, so it looks like this person is a Sag rising. Their ascendant's at 17 degrees Sagittarius. So I'm looking for Jupiter in their chart to kind of speak to, their rising sign. So um, their Jupiter is in Taurus at 26 degrees Taurus. Yes, I'm super familiar with Aquarius season 1989. I dated some. I just ended a relationship with someone born a month after this person. But anyway,
Mercury
yeah.
retro vibes, huh?
I just know a lot of people born in early 1989. I don't know what it is. But yeah, so chart ruler being Jupiter in Taurus, that's going to give you a Taurus sort of vibe too. So like your ascendant is Sag, and Sag rising, well, it's a fire sign, and there's this heat and excitement and inspiration that comes with a Sag rising. There's almost like this just appreciation for life and in particular for learning, for like being a student of life. And so we're going to look to that Jupiter to kind of see where that's playing out and where a lot of the energy is contained. So Jupiter in Taurus in the fifth, what house sign? Oh, Placidus. Okay, house
Positive.
system. So yeah, in the fifth, I have such a hard time reading things in Placidus.
Should we set to whole?
No, you can keep it this way.
Okay.
I just would you mind if I
Oh,
if I um if I did the delineation as like a whole sign?
no, but
You
let's
can
set it
totally
in
keep it this
whole
way.
signs just in case somebody else can't
Okay.
see it as quickly as we can. So whoever this
Okay,
is,
that's a good point.
we're just changing your chart from the tropical Placidus method to whole sign, which will put one sign in each house. And this is the way that the traditional charts were done. Okay, there we go.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's a fault of mine to like I get very like fixed sign. I'm a Scorpio sun. I get very fixed sign about it. I'm just like I can't do it. Um so yeah, Jupiter and Taurus in the sixth house. I would look at this and be like, okay, this person has an orientation towards service or towards like just work. And people whose chart ruler tends to be in the sixth house will be people who work a lot for the most part. Or the sixth house is also the house of illness and injury. So it could be that you deal with those things, but it also could just be that you work in situations where you're tending to people in that way. So like oftentimes I'll see people whose first house ruler in the sixth house, they're nurses. Other times it's just like, they are assistants or people who are in service to others in some way, shape, or form. Also, like in the service industry, that's a pretty common one as well. So yeah, there's just like an orientation towards work.
Awesome. Awesome. See, and it's just that quick. Now, we have another question in the chat, and I don't know if you've studied this or worked with this. So if you don't know, that's okay too. But the concept of aversion when we're talking about, so one of our people would like a little bit more of an explanation of what that is and how you work with that.
Yeah, totally. So I'm glad that came up. Aversion meaning basically not having one of the traditional 5 Ptolemaic aspects to another planet. So the traditional aspects being the conjunction, the sextile, which is 60 degrees, the square, which is 90 degrees, the trine, which is 120 degrees, and the opposition, which is 180 degrees. And there's houses in the birth chart that are an aversion to the ascendant, meaning they don't make one of those aspects to the ascendant. And those houses are the second house, the sixth house, the eighth house, and the 12th house. So I've been thinking, doing some research around this a lot about how people whose chart rulers fall in a dark house, the second, sixth, eighth, or 12th, kind of have a hard time seeing themselves. It's like with the chart ruler being placed in aversion to the ascendant, it's hard to actually like orient yourself and know who you are in a lot of ways. And usually that's solved by, kind of like for the sixth house, like emerging yourself in work, and like you orient yourself, you can kind of see yourself only from the perspective of like work really, or service in some way. And I see that with the eighth house too, like people having a hard time seeing oneself outside of their ability to like to be there or take care of others or to support others. Yeah, and similar things can be said about like the second house and the 12th house.
All right, should we look at another chart?
Yeah.
You're like, yeah.
I love looking at charts.
I know, right? We better keep our jobs then. Okay.
Okay. Leo rising. Cool. So we're looking for the sun. And the sun, and Gemini in the 10th quadrant. It would be 11th whole sign.
Oh gosh.
No, you don't. Yeah, I mean, if
we're gonna
it's
go to
better.
and I want to tell you too before we jump back into this a little bit more. But the chart that you just read before, the person was like laughing a little bit, and they said, "Yes, I work all the time. I'm a legal assistant."
Oh, there you go.
Okay, here we go.
I love that. So yeah, Leo rising chart ruler is the sun, and this person has the sun in Gemini in the 11th house. Let's see. Okay, so cool. Yeah. So I often find people whose chart ruler is in the 11th house, especially when it's the sun, and it has so much to do with identity. It's like they orient themselves based off of their place within whatever group that they're a part of. Or so, it's like they there's this orientation towards friends and just being a part of a group or being one of many. And these people tend to do really well in group situations and tend to almost be like the leader of the group too, especially with the sun. Yeah, it's like you need to have you need to find your people in order to feel like you can shine, in order to feel seen. It's like you need an audience almost, or your crew. Yeah.
Brilliant. So do you think, I'm just looking at this just in a general way, I know they can't see each other that well, but that node also in whole sign is sitting at 0 degrees, which in whole sign we can put the ascendant there as well. So do you think that speaks to the pulling away in some way, or like trusting their own voice within their group maybe?
You mean with the sun kind of close to the south node?
And the south node in whole sign both being at that 0 degree placement.
Yeah. I think Yeah, I feel like with the South Node there, I would kind of interpret that as like there is there's like a familiarity and a comfort with being in group situations. And I kind of always go to like past life or even just like early life
Yeah.
patterning. So it's like being one of many is familiar. Um, being someone that is a creative and like creating just for the sake of creating is less familiar. It's like, yeah, creating for the sake of the group, maybe, or um, sharing, or yeah, shining, sharing one's talents for the sake of the group is more familiar and comfortable, even than like just making your own stuff, which would be the North Node in the fifth house. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I look at the nodes, like the North Node being where there's less familiarity and less patterning. So the soul is like kind of urging to move towards that in order to find some balance, if that makes sense.
Mhm. So what happens? I think this is always interesting when it happens. What happens when you pull up a chart and you've got sun, moon, and rising all right there?
Yeah, triple. One of my really good friends has that Sun Moon Rising all in Pisces. And she's
All the
basically a
Pisces.
mermaid.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, I'm still going to be really curious about that person's chart ruler, like the planet that rules that sign. But basically, what that looks like is someone who's like very much here to explore or like understand their personality and their identity. And I just feel like identity just becomes such an important piece to those people. Yeah, I've seen first house stelliums where it's just like, that person goes on to be like, they're like a personality, like that's kind of how they're known for, is like a personality. I'm thinking of someone who kind of started a whole lifestyle blog just around them and who they are,
Sure.
and like their journey. And so like, yeah, there's just a lot of weight put on the identity in that case.
Now, is there any point for you where you see just the heat of the struggle at the rising sign, especially, the sun and the moon have their goals of what they're evolutionarily trying to build and sustain. And do you ever
Hmm.
find that the ascendant just is stuck in the struggle between those two?
Hmm. I
I know
don't
you have to
know.
like think back through every chart ever.
So you kind of said like between like the sun, moon, and rising. Well, no, I kind of feel like the ascendant itself, it's just like an energy, like a vibe. Whereas the sun and the moon can have like conditions, and those are actual moving pieces. Where the ascendant moves too, but it's not like a literal physical object. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah, and so I kind of see like the ascendant and that energy is just being almost like a constant. Um, and the sun and the moon having they're more changeable. Like, the ascendant can't have like a poor condition. It's just wherever it is. Whereas like the sun can be in detriment, the moon can be in fall. Does that kind of answer your
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. No, and I think that's something great to point out is that's the thing on the points. You don't get like a challenge point essentially because they can't be in detriment. They don't
Hmm.
really have a dignity or a debility. They're just kind of where they're at, shaping the story, whereas all of the rest of the planets can be comfortable ish or uncomfortable. So that's
Right.
something to note if you've been studying for a while and just hadn't thought about it that way. I think that's phenomenal. All right, should we look at one more chart and see what we come up with? We're going to
Sure.
leave the United States for a birthday this time, which I always think is neat. Okay,
Cool. Okay.
and I'm going to pop this into whole sign. You guys are some whole sign voters out there today. They're like, I like whole sign too.
Cool. All right. Capricorn rising. And this person has Saturn in Taurus. Cool. Yes. I have seen a couple of these. I don't know. Yeah, this person out there, if you research the astrologer Marion Altman, they're also a Virgo with Capricorn Rising and Taurus and Saturn and Taurus. So similar chart. But yeah, so Capricorn Rising, that's an earth sign. There's already going to be this sort of almost like seriousness or automatic orientation towards responsibility, like feeling like there's a weight there with the Capricorn Rising. It's a pretty dense sign. And then you add in the fact that the chart ruler is in Taurus, which is like the most fixed of all the signs, fixed earth sign, but it's in the fifth house. So there is this sense of like creativity, or just or like a need for enjoyment, pleasure, which is almost like maybe not antithetical to Capricorn, but it's not necessarily where your mind would go when you think of like Saturn, Saturn in the fifth house. But it's almost like there's a seriousness about how to enjoy life, or it's like really trying to figure it out. And it might take some time. And by that, I mean, like the Saturn return will be very much about the necessity for ease and joy and fun and sensuality and just pleasure in life, especially being in Taurus. So I see this and I'm like, okay, this is someone that likely is extremely creative, and that doesn't mean you have to be artistic to be creative, but someone that can actually generate like generate stuff, like make things, like make actual tangible things that can also maybe produce some money too. So I'm looking at Saturn as also the ruler of the second house as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's definitely an orientation towards like figuring out how to kind of like almost like take advantage of the material realm, in a way that is producing or creating. I think that makes sense.
That's so awesome. This person said, I take the things that I enjoy super seriously. And she is a nail and lash tech by trade.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, beauty. That makes sense with Saturn and Taurus.
Taurus. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you. Look,
Yes.
everybody, like my nails and my eyebrows and all my Taurus fully appreciates your work. So thank you very much
Hell
for all of
yeah.
that. That is so awesome. Okay, let's look at just maybe one more and we'll move on here.
Cool.
Okay, did we do this one? We did do that one. Let's do that one. Okay.
Ooh, okay, cool. Taurus rising and Venus is in Virgo. Cool. Um, awesome. So yeah, Venus and Virgo in the fifth. I mean, well, to start, I guess, Taurus rising, there's this with Taurus risings, it's almost like stability is a constant, and that's not to say that your life is always stable, but like that's the vibe. Like you are probably someone who is a pretty stable and reliable human being. And yeah, life, I think with Taurus risings and all fixed rising signs, life just tends to move at a slower pace. And it's like you figure out what you want, you finally get to that point, and then you sort of like you sink your roots down and you put a lot of intention and focus into whatever it is that you chose to do. It's not a lot of, with mutable risings, there's a lot of just like scattering the energy and sort of like going with the flow, going with the ups and downs. With Taurus rising, fixed risings, it's a lot more, the intention is to be stable. So this person is their chart ruler is Venus and Virgo, in the fifth house. And so Venus in Virgo is in the sign of its fall, which is a way of kind of speaking to a planet's dignity or its condition, like how well can it do its job? How well can it do what it's like set out to do? And Venus, what Venus wants to do is enjoy. Like Venus wants to experience pleasure and the good things in life, beauty, love, music, sex, like all the like lovely things in life.
All the
Um,
lovely things.
but in Virgo, Venus has a harder time doing that. And that's because it's in fall. And a planet in its fall is basically, you can think of it as like literally fallen, like either on the ground or even in a lower place, like a hole or a ditch, right? And so if you are fallen, you, first of all, it's harder to be seen because you're in a lower place. And um, it's almost like you have to push yourself to extremes in order to be noticed or seen. And there's a level of like feeling unseen, unnoticed, disrespected, disregarded with a planet in fall. So with that being your chart ruler, that could be your experience all the times, just like your perspective being from a lower place and kind of like looking up and wanting that respect and that, that understanding, wanting to be seen. So there's that, but there's a couple other things that make it so your Venus is actually not as bad as it might seem. It's in the fifth house. Venus has its joy in the fifth house.
Mhm.
It's its favorite house to be in, and we actually get the significations from the fifth house from Venus. And so in the fifth house, Venus is actually like in a place where it can kind of focus on pleasure, creativity, like just making beautiful things. Another thing is that you were born at nighttime, and that actually makes Venus stronger. It makes it even more benefic than Jupiter. You have Jupiter in Sag, which is awesome for Jupiter, but it's almost like being born at nighttime. Venus kind of takes over as like the planet that can be the most positive, that can bring you the most good. Um, so yeah, Venus and fall in the fifth house. I see this. Well, for one thing, Venus and Virgo folks tend to be um, really, really detail oriented, and especially when we're talking about like art. And this being in the fifth house of art and creativity, I would imagine that like if you are an artist, which I'm also kind of guessing because the sun is there as well. But if you, and then the Pisces moon also, and this is just a wild guess that you might be an artist. But if you are an artist, I would imagine that your work is really detail oriented. And maybe some perfectionistic tendencies there. But in general, I often see people with Venus and Virgo. It's almost like you kind of go above and beyond often because there's that idea of like not being respected or recognized, and so having to push yourself to an extreme in order to receive that recognition or love or whatever. And that can look like some perfectionistic tendencies, which I'm sure any Virgo placement can relate to.
You're like, you get it. You understand. Just kind of innately. Yeah. And this chart have not yet had its first Saturn return either.
Yeah.
So that's definitely going to adjust the lens over how some of this has shown up for you in your adolescence and your youth as you get to that 29 and a half, 30-year window in there. But at 27, I think you're going to start to look around and go, oh my God, what is going on? Things feel like they don't fit anymore. And the whole chart, I feel like when you're coming to the Saturn return, the whole chart gets a little bit of a shake, because you're shedding your youth in that time. So even your ascending energy, even though that's not the point of the return, I think starts to show up in a different way. What's your experience with that, with the Saturn return shaking the chart?
Yeah. I mean, I've been moving through mine this year. I have Saturn in early Aquarius, so I had my Saturn return start this year. And yeah, I mean, everything's kind of shaken up for sure. Especially like beforehand at like 27, you get your nodal reversal. Like you get a lot of things that kind of shake you up a little bit and make you, it's almost like it prepares you or puts you
Yes.
into the right position to like encounter Saturn return. So yeah, I definitely feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I just tell people, I'm like, look, if you don't know anything about astrology, you don't follow, you don't believe, like whatever your situation is on this planet, when you get to be 27 years old, you're going to just look around and go, what happened? And whether you call it astrology or you call it like the human life cycle of development, I mean, it just doesn't even matter what you call it. We turn 27 and the world gets real interesting. And then you turn like 32 and it's like being like on baby deer legs. It's just a couple years after the Saturn return has happened, you're learning to walk like a regular old adult, you know. So I always laugh when people are like 32 and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I'm like, that's okay. You're just on
Yeah.
adult baby deer legs. It's
Yeah.
sorting itself out. Just breathe.
That's good to know
Yeah.
on my end.
Yes. You know what? And I think like sometimes when people just tell us, it's helpful, right? It's just helpful to know going forward. If I would have like really known about that, I think at that time, it would have helped me. So when I turned 31 and I didn't feel like I had all of the answers and I was like, yay, I'm an adult, but what does that mean? It would have been nice to know that like, no, I'm still totally on time.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
exactly.
there you go. I mean, but you have had a pretty serious year this year. Like you
Yeah.
have had a come out like nobody's
Yeah.
business.
Wasn't really expecting this year to be so much that, but I think part of it, I guess, is Saturn return. Um, yeah, I don't know. I had a pretty like last year, I had a lot of like career transits. Jupiter in my 10th house, you know. So yeah, I wasn't necessarily expecting this year to be like a continuation of that as much as it has been, but I'm not complaining.
Yeah, right. You're like, well, okay, I guess I'm out here. I'll sort it out in 2 years. I'll just
Yeah.
do it right now. Right.
Exactly,
This is where
exactly.
okay. Do you want to look at one last chart before we go?
I'm always down.
And
Yeah.
I feel like today is the Virgo rising day.
Oh
Like
yeah.
that seems to be the vibe. That's the vibe. It's Virgo rising day. But this
You
is a
pull
good
them
one.
in.
Yeah, we've got, and it was just so funny because we were talking about that last night. Last night we were doing an event together, and it turns out everybody was a fixed sign. Like
Yes,
there's a vibe that kind of comes around certain things that you're doing it. So Virgo
for
risings.
sure. Okay, cool. I like this. So this is a Virgo rising chart. Um, and Mercury, which rules Virgo, is actually retrograde in Leo in the 12th house. And this person was born 2 days after my best friend. So I know this chart pretty well too. um, yeah, I know a lot of, I'm also 1991 baby. Are we still babies? I don't know. Saturn return. I guess after the Saturn return, then we're not babies anymore.
Yeah, just when it happens, you're in. That's it. You're in.
But yeah, there was actually a Mercury and a Venus retrograde happening in like the late summer, fall of 91. So yeah, this person's ruled by their retrograde Mercury. And I think like for one thing, when Mercury or when the chart ruler is in the 12th house, um, and you have a lot of planets in the 12th house, those 12th house planets are so sensitive. It's like, I like to think of it as, you know, they just rose over the horizon. So you were born, you know, looks like maybe an hour, not even, after sunrise. And all those planets had just kind of become like we reawakened from this underworld journey. They were underneath the earth for so long, you know, and then all of a sudden they kind of get thrust into the daylight and above the horizon. And there's this sensitivity. You can think of the ascendant as birth. And so all these planets are like just been born basically, and they're brand new. And so, yeah, they're very vulnerable and sensitive. And that kind of speaks to this 12th house energy of being in like an in-between state. All the cadent houses have this sort of in-between liminal energy, but I think the 12th house in particular has um, it's a very liminal sort of transient space. And yeah, I think when your chart ruler's here, there is a need for alone time. Like, absolutely, you need to have your own space. You need to have time, not just alone from other people, but from just like the world. Like you need to be able to sort of just disappear sometimes or get away. Not disappear as in like don't scare people, but but
Yeah,
like
like don't just go, just don't
don't just
leave,
disappear. Yeah, but
right?
retreat I think is a really good keyword for the 12th house. Retreat, like the 12th house can either be retreat, which is a more positive signification, or it can be imprisonment. It can be like a choice to be able to get away from the world, or oftentimes, or maybe not oftentimes, but sometimes that's like a force or even like a punishment, which is where you get like Saturn as like Saturn joys in the 12th house. You get some Saturn significations with the 12th house. But yeah, I see this as someone who, in order, especially to like process, in order to like move through all of the external stimuli that taking in, you need your alone time. I think that alone time and space can be extremely creative, a place where you can sort of like, I'm sure your inner world is just like wild, but like people on the outside don't really get that because that's just for you. That 12th house, excuse me, that 12th house space is like, that's your personal space. Whereas, like, you know, people might get that in a different, like kind of filtered through that Virgo ascendant. But it's kind of all for you. You have a very active, imaginative sort of inner world that I feel like, you know, probably most people don't get to experience that. Perhaps it comes out in your work. I'm looking at the fact that you were born during a full moon. Um, and yeah, there is that sort of like countering, like balancing with that Aquarius moon and even that Saturn there in the 6th house. um yeah, this is such an interesting chart. I feel like I feel like this is someone who is very um, effective when they have the time and space to like, and I think time and space is like what keeps coming up for me, but you really like, it can't be rushed, especially with the retrograde planets. It's so much becomes internalized that you just need time to process. Um, yeah, I feel like this is probably someone that's really, really creative, but perhaps doesn't really share a lot of that with the outside world. It's just kind of for them. And I think that's totally okay.
Yep, and I think that Saturn return is gonna pop you out. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I wonder what this year had been like because they've already had two exact Saturn returns. And the last one's going to be, I think, like New Year's Eve around then. So,
Yeah, so it's just like Saturn's like, no, no,
yeah.
no, no, right? Like, so then you finally just get to kind of pop out of that other side. And then I feel like, you know, just because it's all of this Aquarian energy over here that Saturn is activated at the return, it's like the Leo extravaganza,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, I've learned some things. Let me say them out loud
Yeah, for
right now,
sure.
which is so funny, right? Because as we approach these pivotal moments like the return of anything, really, sometimes it's the spectrum of I've just learned it or I figured it out and I'm going to bring it out now, and I go way far to this side or I go way far to this
Hmm.
side before I find that like crystallized perfect in the middle way to express this thing. So, you know, if on New Year's we see you on TV, I'll be like, happy Saturn return some.
Yeah. So true. Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. So we just have a couple questions for you before we wrap up. And one of
Cool.
them is, how do you calculate the ascendant? How do you even get that?
Yeah, I mean, by hand, you're gonna have to take a class maybe with Kepler to figure that out. But usually well, not usually, like any astrology software will calculate that for you. And it's basically calculating the degree of whatever planet was rising at the moment that you were born. So um so yeah, it's, you would use an astrology software. I would not recommend trying to figure out how to do it by hand unless you're like taking a class and someone's teaching you how to do it, because it's very, 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 very involved. I've tried to learn. It's really, really involved. So
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. I know. I'm going right now through the super hand calculation of that whole thing, girl. And I am like not a math person
Mm.
anyway. So this is my real like third house perfection, Virgo rising trying to do it. And I'm like, look, all I know is you're alive. That's where I land. Like at the end of it, I'll get it though. I'll get it.
Yeah,
But
it's a
right now,
lot.
I'm like, I don't know. You're alive. You have a pulse. Good job.
Yeah. Congrats.
So what do you need to calculate that ascendant is time. We need a time.
Hmm.
And so what do you do though if you don't have a time?
Yeah, time and location. Because location matters, because that's, wherever you are in the world, the eastern horizon is probably going to look different, from in California than it does in New York. Not probably, it definitely will. um, but in terms, oh, you said, what was the question you had? Oh, if you don't have a time. What I tend to do, so you're not going to be able to find the degree of your ascendant if you don't have a birth time. But I tend to look at solar charts or sunrise charts. So what that looks like is putting the sun on the ascendant or in the first house, and delineating from there. So that's not necessarily a rising sign, but it will show sort of like what the chart looks like that morning, at sunrise when the person was born.
So it gives you just a little bit of a feel. And I always say, if you just do the solar chart, you really kind of get a strong 50-50 of how some things are going to play out. And that is why I believe so wholesomely in general readings as well, and solar readings, because it
Hmm.
seems like in my experience, every sun sign gets a taste of the vibe because it's like a guitar string. When you strum the vibration of Taurus, Taurus is going to experience some of the things. So that's why if you're listening to a general reading, you can listen for your sun. Usually it's cast with a solar chart. But people will always ask too, should I listen for my ascending energy if I'm listening to a general, or my sun or my moon? And what do you tell people? What's your suggestion, Kira?
I always say the ascendant is going to be the most accurate, but I also say definitely for the sun as well. If you were born at nighttime, meaning the sun was below the horizon, it had set or had not risen yet, I would say it's cool to look at your moon sign, in terms of like horoscopes as well. Um, but I wouldn't necessarily say that would be the case for people who were born in the daytime. I feel like you definitely the sun and the rising night charts, the moon and the rising would probably make more sense.
Yeah. And you kind of have to listen for a little bit and figure out where you're really vibing in, because that's the other thing I find about people and myself is at different points in my life I have been really on the vibe of that Virgo rising, and I could tap in, and that to me was also an indicator that those were some lessons I was learning a little bit more strong than maybe I was in my moon energy. So you kind of have to listen and find where you vibe in and then take it for what you can, but then also apply it to your chart. Because if you listen to a general reading for your ascendant, but you're not using whole sign, you may not find those planets exactly in the same placement. So a couple things depend. So just try it out and see what you get.
Yeah, I agree.
Rant about general readings over. Awesome. Thank you so much, Shakira, for coming over. I think this is like a gentle, easy, beautiful topic that we were just able to share with people today.
Thank
And
you for
so,
having me.
yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't wait to have you back. We'll have to think of something else where we can go
I
like
know.
dip really deep and dark and get all Scorpio, Taurus on this
Yeah,
and like
yeah.
really take it there. But you know what, man? It's like a nice Monday in the United States. Let's talk about the ascending energy, right?
I agree. Yeah, it's really nice.
Absolutely beautiful. All right, you guys, thank you so much for showing up to the Eat and Greet today. I hope that the time you took to watch and show up and participate, we gave you something that was absolutely worth it. Remember, you can always watch these back on YouTube, and you can always watch them back ad-free on my Patreon, which that is in the description box down below. You can go check out Shakira. Where can we find you? I'm going to put it in the
Oh,
description box, but you can say it too.
Yeah, I'm at my website is theastrology.com, and on social media I'm at theastrology. Yeah, pretty easy to find.
Yeah, there you go. It's like I tagged the wrong person this morning, by the way.
Oh
And
no.
I was like, oops, you're not coming to the show. Can you tell Shakira she is?
Oh yeah, and I also have a podcast called The Astrology Show where we just talk astrology. So you can check that
Yeah.
out too.
And I love it. The way that Shakira just describes this, she's like, we just nerd out.
Yeah,
And I
pretty
just love
much.
that. So if you are down for some super astro nerding out, or you just feel like you were in the vibe with Shakira today, definitely go to the description box down below, check her out, go research, go connect. Okay. All right, you guys, like this video, comment, share, subscribe, come join on Patreon, and we will see you tomorrow where we're doing like super eat and greets. Giulio Pellegrini will be here, and we're going
Ooh.
to talk about some esoteric astrology, which if you haven't explored that, I love it. The idea that the soul comes in a little piece at a time, such a beautiful concept. And then 2 hours later, we've got cousin Clarissa Dolphin back to do part 2 of the presidential candidates charts through the
Ooh.
vibrational astrology lens. And if you guys know anything about when cousin Clarissa comes over, she's going to laugh her ass off. And it is a good time. So I look forward to seeing everybody over here